Hey, welcome to another edition of the Big Noon Kickoff, the off-season. Glad you're with us. Bruce Feldman, Tim Brando, Joel Klatt joining the show. I'm Rob Stone. We're going to talk Big Ten. Luke Fickell, the head coach of the University of Cincinnati, is going to join us. Interesting conversation, including his wrestling pedigree. Great question with that one there, Bruce. I can't wait to hear what he has to say about that. And we're going to talk about the impact of transfers in college football. But let's start in the Big Ten. And if you have been talking about the Big Ten over the last couple of years, the program at the top of the list has been Ohio State. Joel, will Ohio State continue to be at the top of the Big Ten food chain this year?
Well, and this is not just a Big Ten problem, Rob, but this is a problem, if you want to call it that, throughout college football. And that's the fact that the teams at the top of each conference have really separated themselves out, first through recruiting and then performance on the field. We've seen now Ohio State with 4 straight Big Ten titles, Oklahoma with 6 straight Big 12 titles. Alabama has dominated, obviously, the entire country, 6 out of 12 national championships. Clemson has won the ACC, it seems like, 5, 6, 7 years in a row. So this is going on all over, and it speaks to kind of the separation of the haves and the have-nots in our sport. Yes, absolutely. Ohio State is the class of the Big Ten, and they have been for the last few years by a wide margin. If you look at the composite rankings of just number of stars, right, star power in terms of recruiting, Ohio State has basically all of the 5-star players in the entire Big Ten, and they're concentrated on that roster. They have their coach. Obviously, they're going to have to replace their quarterback, but that roster is too deep at almost every single position, guys, with someone that could start almost anywhere else in the Big Ten. They are loaded, and if they get any source of quarterback play out of one of these young guys, they're going to be the class of the Big Ten.
To Joel's point, when you get the highest ranked quarterback out of his junior year, all right, because he decides, you know what, I'm going to opt out of high school because I've got a great future, and he already knows before he gets to Columbus, he's not even in the picture to get the quarterbacking position. That should tell you something about how stockpiled Ryan Day's football team really is, Rob. There's no question that the Buckeyes are the top of the lot, and scarily so, really, in the Big Ten. It's up to everybody else, really, to step up now. And I don't mean in just in terms of their records at the end of the year. We can look at records at the end of the season and still know that even though you may have lost 1 or 2 Big Ten games, you still weren't close when you had your chance against the Buckeyes. Ohio State, by far and away, is not only the best team in the league, but is continually going to be one of the 2 or 3 best teams in the country. So that should tell you about just how much distance Joel's talking about.
Right. And I think we all agree there's a huge gap, Bruce. But normally when you're replacing an absolute elite quarterback and you have a real question mark at quarterback, champagne problem question marks at quarterback, mind you, there would be some concern. The secondary was an issue last year for sure. Trey Sermon is gone. There's a lot of holes to fill in Columbus. So why do you think there's still this optimism, Bruce?
A couple of things. So I'll start, you talked about where Joel is referencing the 5-star guys. One of the best kept secrets in college football is the job Brian Hartline, former Ohio State receiver, who has done their stocking and developing that receiver room. So we know about Chris Olave, we know about Garrett Wilson. Now there's Marvin Harrison Jr. there, Jackson Smith and Jigba. These are guys who I think whoever wins that job, whether it's CJ Stroud, whoever becomes a starting quarterback, is going to inherit the best group of receivers in the country. And I think the culture of that receiver room, remember a few years ago, it was Paris Campbell, it was Terry McLaurin, it was Johnny Dixon. It was a very mature group. And I feel like that culture has really done a lot to set the tempo for this team. So you have that side of it. I also think one big positive, for as much as they lost on defense, especially in the middle of the defense, they weren't really special relative to what Ohio State usually is at edge rusher. Now they got Jack Sawyer. They've really upgraded the talent level in Larry Johnson's room again. And I think they could be really nasty up front. They were good last year. I think they can be really, really good because of the buzz around some of these young edge rushers they've got there.
So the consensus is Ohio State is the team to beat. one of the big talking points last year was, what happened to Michigan? What happened to Penn State? The Nittany Lions, Tim, with that woeful start, and they absolutely, they were able to turn it around at the end of the campaign, and James Franklin able to use that momentum heading into the postseason. But between Michigan and Penn State, who do you see as most likely to have a better bounce back type season?
Well, it helps always, Rob, when you've got quality opposition to play early in so-called marquee games to get people's attention. And our friend Joel is going to be busy with the Gus Bus week 1, seeing Wisconsin and Penn State. I look at this particular season for Coach Franklin, now in his 8th year, as similar to the circumstances going into the 3rd year, when I think he was ahead of schedule and got his team to a Big Ten championship. Last year was a one-off year. I mean, yeah, we're happy that we got it played, and we're happy that we navigated through it, albeit with some teams playing 5 games, some teams playing 6 or 7, no one really at full strength. Penn State is undervalued this year because of what happened to them during COVID. They are a team, I think, unlike Michigan, that has recruited at a very high level, the second highest level in the Big Ten on a regular basis. So even though they lose some players, like everybody does, I think the most talented players and big play capability at receiver, they use the tight end beautifully. I love Clifford as a quarterback, and they got a chance to make a statement in a Big Ten conference game at Camp Randall right out of the gates. And then shortly thereafter, they get an SEC opponent that's in transition. Now, Auburn's got a new coach. I think the world of Harsin. Okay, but this is not the right time for them to be playing at Penn State. But still, it's a marquee game against a top-tier SEC team that can give Penn State, I think, a real shot in the arm as they move into the Big Ten season. I think the Nittany Lions are that team. They are going to bounce back, might even win double-digit games, and give Ohio State a scare. Michigan, I think they are still a club that's got a long way to go in far too many areas.
Well, and yes, a long way to go. I would agree with that, Tim, but also just massive questions about Michigan. I can't remember a time when there was this big of question marks around that program or a program of that stature. It reminds me a lot of, I don't remember the specific year, but Leighton Mack Brown's tenure at Texas. He changed the staff. Old guard was out, new guard was in. And if you remember, he hired as coordinators 2 guys that have gone on to have a lot of success, but did not have success for him at Texas. And that's Manny Diaz as a defensive coordinator and Brian Harsin as an offensive coordinator. I believe it was 2012, Bruce, if I'm not mistaken. But those changes didn't work out. It didn't fit with the culture. And now Michigan has gone down that road. Now, they didn't replace Josh Gaddis, who's an excellent offensive coordinator, but they replaced pretty much everybody else, right? And gone is the old guard and in is the new guard. And I'm very interested to see what that means for the culture of the program, because as much as I don't want to evaluate last season because of what was happening with the pandemic and how difficult it was just to play a game week to week, that was woeful from Michigan. I do think injuries on the offensive line hurt them, because what we saw against Minnesota in their first game never materialized the rest of the season as far as run game and dominance up front. But I would agree with Tim. I think with Sean Clifford back, the change at offensive coordinator to bring in Mike Yurcich, who was at Texas last year, and yes, that staff was fired, but remember, they averaged more points at Texas last year than they had going back to the 2005 national championship team. So the offense wasn't necessarily the problem with the Longhorns, and Yurcich is a guy that I have a lot of faith in, and I think he's going to get Sean Clifford to a point where he's not turning the football over as much as he was a year ago, and they'll be more the team that won 4 straight and less the team that lost their first 5 last year.
I think one of the things that maybe got overlooked a little bit with all the crazy stuff that came out of COVID and what it did to college football teams, talking to some Penn State assistants this offseason, they really talked about what a dark kind of place they were in at times last year. And they were reeling beyond just the COVID situation. Journey Brown, who a lot of people thought was the most talented running back in the Big Ten and primed for a big year, his career was ended for medical reasons that came to light. And he was such a personality and such a spirit in that clubhouse and around those guys that I think they were really reeling. And on top of that, you had issues where at one point they had the deepest running back room in the country, and then Noah Kane is hurt, and they've had some other issues there.
Yep.
And I think from what I've heard this offseason, a lot of the people inside the Penn State program feel like they're in a much better place right now, that they feel like, remember, Micah Parsons opted out. He was really the star of that team on the other side of the ball. So they lost a lot of star power. And I think they were reeling. From what I understand, the leadership inside the locker room right now is much, much stronger. There's more guys who they feel like they can count on. Now the key is, again, this is now the third coordinator in 3 years on the offensive side of the ball. How does Sean Clifford, because he was pretty good a few years ago, can he be better? It helps to have Jahan Dotson there. We know he's a playmaker. I think they will be definitely better. The question is how much better? Are they going to be better being they're going to be a top 20 team, or they have a chance to be a top 10, top 5 kind of team and really give Ohio State a run? I think Sean Clifford and what he does with Mike Yurcich, I think that's going to be the big key to all.
If I might add a caveat, Rob, to Joel, how much do you think Penn State accomplishes is based on what they do at Camp Randall right out of the gates?
Boy, are you asking me, Tim?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I do know that losing the game at Indiana in their first game last year, the way that they did, remember with Penix diving for the pylon, I think that hurt them, along with the other things that Bruce was talking about that was kind of the black cloud hanging over the program.
Yeah.
Listen, we all know momentum is a big thing, and that's why a lot of programs for years have scheduled their softest games early to try to get the feet wet for their team. Obviously, it's going to play a huge part, but it's also more so than that. Those two teams have really big aspirations. And if you're Penn State in that East Division and you lose a league game to start, you immediately think to yourself, well, we've got to be perfect now just to tie Ohio State probably in the East Division to go to the Big Ten championship game. So I think the pressure is certainly on Penn State in that opener.
That opener, first Saturday in September, Camp Randall, Big Noon Kickoff will be there live on Fox. Bruce, real quick, I just want a Michigan follow-up question for you. Jim Harbaugh did sign an extension in the offseason, but how much does that actually cool his hot seat?
It doesn't really at all, Rob. I think, some people focused in on, well, he's going to take less money. It's more incentive driven. As the guy said, I mean, he really turned over the staff, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Don Brown, who has a decorated career and a lot of good defenses, they could really, he rolled the dice. Mike McDonald is going to take over as a defensive coordinator. He worked for his brother John with the Ravens, really well thought of young coach, but now the defensive staff is very new. What I'm interested to see is it seemed like, now there's some really good players there, especially Aiden Hutchinson has a chance to be an All-American defensive lineman, and he's a leader. The secondary, Dax Hill, big time athlete, but there's other guys where it seems like they've missed on a lot of defensive backs in their evaluation. And if they can't match up, I'm curious to see how that's going to solve things, because I think there's a lot of people who have written Jim Harbaugh off at this point. And as Joel said earlier about the Mac Brown flipping the staff late, is it too little, too late? We'll see. He needs what I think more than anything is to find the identity of this program. When he was at Stanford and he built that thing to be a top 5 program, they had a clear identity. I don't know what the identity is of Michigan football. They don't have the heavy start that Penn State has right out of the gate. They have a chance to kind of establish that identity, but they better do it in a hurry because, they do play Washington, but the first 4 games are in Ann Arbor, and then week 5 is a heavyweight matchup with the Badgers.
He's had a long time to build that identity. Oh, by the way, let's talk about 2 of the real feel-good stories, not just in the Big Ten, but college football last year, Indiana and Northwestern. And Klatt, I'll start with you and the fighting Pat Fitzgerald. It seems like 3, 4, or 5 years, there's this window that he just has an absolute ace in the hole type team that gets them to the Big Ten championship game or something greater and beyond. That was last season for sure. The problem, though, has been able to carry it over. So can the Wildcats carry over last season's success into this one?
Well, in order to have sustained year in and year out success in this sport, you've got to recruit at the highest level. And this is not a knock against Pat as a recruiter. It's just where Northwestern is in the pantheon of the sport. It's very difficult to do that. So they are very much a evaluate and develop type of program. And they've been able to do that really well. But that's why I think you see some spikes for them. You see them have a great year. You see them have a down year. You see them have a great year and then a down year. And I think it's going to be very difficult for them to replicate what they were a year ago. Remember, they lost, they call them the law firm, right? Those linebackers were so good. I'm talking about guys like Blake Gallagher and Patty Fisher. They had Greg Newsome on the outside on their defense. This was the best scoring defense in the Big Ten. Their defensive coordinator, Mike Hankiewicz, guy I played for actually way back in the day, he retires. So something that they leaned on as the foundational piece of their success last year was their defense. The most important pieces of that defense are no longer there. And while I like what they've done from a personnel standpoint here and there, I just find it really hard to believe that they're going to be able to replicate last season's success. That doesn't mean they're going to fall off a cliff, but I just don't know if they're a division championship type of team, in particular when you see what Iowa has got, what Wisconsin has, and even Minnesota from a returning starter standpoint.
Bruce, fair to say Indiana will have a better chance than replicating their season?
I think so. Yeah. I don't think there's anything fluky about what happened last year with Tom Allen's team. Michael Penix Jr. is back. He is healthy from everything I've heard, coming off that injury late last year. I mean, he is a dynamic, big time athlete, really good passer. They have really good receivers. I think it was a really key addition they had. Dylan McCullough is one of the best running back coaches in football. He comes in, Tom Allen hired him back at IU from the Chiefs. He got Stephen Carr, who had been an up and down, pretty inconsistent career at USC, but was a guy he knows well. I think he thinks he's going to be a huge addition to that offense. And then on the other side of the ball, they do lose Kane Womack, who was the defensive coordinator, who did a remarkable job there. And now he's a head coach at South Alabama. The good news is, as good as they were on defense last year, they did it all without probably their best athlete and their best player in Marcelino Ball. He got hurt on the eve of the season. He's back. He's in better shape. I think that they have a chance to be a top 15, top 20 team because Tom Allen has not only really established the culture there, but I think the upgrade in athletes, they brought in a bunch of transfers who are big time guys that I think will fill in a couple of key spots. And I just think that the confidence that this team has from being around some of these players this offseason, they're no pushover now. I think this is a legit top 25 program because of what Tom Allen has already established there.
I think there's a lot of programs throughout the Big Ten that would look through their schedule and go, oh, Indiana, kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, bye week, right? We can take things easy. What Tom Allen has built there in Bloomington, that is no more. At the end of last season, there were 4 teams ranked from the Big Ten. There were 8 programs from non-Power 5 programs that finished ranked inside the final AP top 25 poll. Buffalo, San Jose State, the Spartans getting there, the fighting Dave Lettermans of Ball State, Liberty. What a season they had. Tim, tell me about number 15, Louisiana. Hold on, we don't have time. 14th ranked Coastal Carolina. And at the top of that list, the number 1 team on that list, the Cincinnati Bearcats. Joining us now, the head coach of the team on top of that list, Luke Fickell. Thank you for joining us literally minutes before you're throwing you and the team on the bus to head out to camp. We appreciate the time. So let's talk about all this great momentum you guys had from last season. I know there's danger in looking in the rearview mirror, but everything that happened last year, how have you noticed it impacting your team, your program this year already?
Well, it's kind of unique. I mean, I've always kind of said they win that last game and you get built up a lot of momentum going into the off season. And the reality is we didn't win that last game. So there's a little bit of a balance there that that we had to kind of address, meaning you don't want to be satisfied with being in it and things like that, but you want to learn from it and you want to continue to build the momentum based on how the whole season went. So I think with the maturity and some of the guys that we got coming back, we've been able to handle it really well throughout that entire offseason into the spring and now into the summer, that those guys were not satisfied, but really kind of energized by how the entire season went.
Coach, speaking simply from the standpoint of where your program is off of that near miss against Georgia, I realize the focus is now as a coach, sort of live in tunnel vision, but it was that game, I think, in large measure that helped build the case for the expansion to 12 in the near future. We may be a couple of years away from it happening, but it definitely stimulated a lot of the offseason conversation. But for you as a head coach, I'm curious about the good part of that being that, but also the tough part, those last few minutes when you couldn't quite get that first down that was needed. How much have you played that over in your head, but at the same time thought about maybe what that loss may have meant in the big picture of the game?
Thought about it a lot, went through it an awful lot, but never watched the film until the day before spring ball. I couldn't bring myself to put it without being able to go back onto the field and do some football, so I really kind of just went through it in my head, but never watched it in its entirety. Never watched it offensively, never watched it defensively, never watched the special teams. I kind of purposely said, I'm going to wait till the night before spring ball. That way, all those frustrations that I have about what maybe we should have done or could have done, I can have them for one night. I can go on the field, spring ball can start, and you can kind of get your mind rolling into the next one. So a lot of great things. We all know you try to evaluate yourself on how you play, not always just the result, even though the result, has a lot to do with it in that momentum and energy to what you are. But try to really kind of hone in and say, now let's evaluate this thing in all of the aspects, not just the result, but how we went about a lot of different things and how we played in the last regular season game, meaning the championship game as opposed to the bowl game. To me, for a team, is a far cry to show us that we're moving in the right direction.
Coach, I'm sure that you've tried to, communicate to your team that every team's lifespan is 1 year. And it really doesn't matter what you did last year. Obviously, you've got some returning starters at important positions and probably good leadership. You have turnover now on your staff. My dad was a high school football coach for 30 years, and he used to say complacency is the root of all evil. So how do you go and take your program from a program that was chasing and running down the type of season that you wanted to have, i.e. last year, to a team that can sustain that and a program that can sustain that through an offseason of a sense of urgency? Take us through that, if you would.
Always try to say, if you don't know where you've come from, you got no idea where you're going. And I don't just mean coming from last year, but coming from 4 years ago where, we had a real tough time winning 4 games. We should have only won 1, and really kind of try to look at it as a growth from all the way back there. Because fortunately, the leaders of this team were a part of that. The Desmond Ritters, the Majay Sanders, those guys were a part of that 4-win season, and how difficult and how tough it was. So it's not just this is how we did last year. We are fortunate enough to have that bigger body to look, hey, this is where we've come from year 1 of basically can't winning a game to year 2 of some way, somehow finding ways to win a game, to year 3, maybe not playing nearly like we really believed we could have with the talent we had, to year 4, starting to kind of put a lot of it together, meaning offensively, defensively, and special teams, to be, more comfortable and a little more dominant in a lot of those games. And where's that next step? So it's not just looking at that 1 year, the good fortunes of having these guys that have been here to be able to say, okay, this is the process over 4, I think helps us not just be complacent and excited about pats on the back from how things went last year.
Coach, Joel touched on the coaching turnover you guys had on the staff. One of the rising stars and really one of the hottest commodities in the coaching profession this winter was your old defensive coordinator, Marcus Freeman, and you'd spent a bunch of time with him. You probably know him as well as anybody in coaching circles. He goes to Notre Dame. What do you think it is about him that makes him such a special coach and why he's seen as such a rising star in the business?
There's a lot of reasons. I mean, I say in the big picture of it, it's a whole package. And I mean that from, some guys are really good coaches. Some guys are really good technicians. Some guys are really good communicators. Some guys are really good recruiters. I think the whole package of saying you played the game, you had to work at the game, you've played it at a high level, you've had it taken away from you sometimes. So it's a little bit more of a passion for you. And then you add that in with the natural personalities and even family that give you the whole rounded picture to say, there's not a flaw. There's not something that we lack, meaning, as a coach, when you're looking to complete your staff or even a head coach, you're looking for someone that's so well-rounded that in every aspect they have a chance to be successful. And a lot of it comes down to not just us, but the people that are around us, our families and things. And in this business, if it's not an all in, it's really tough to be great at what you do. Meaning, if your family's not involved in a part of recruiting and a part of your programs, there's going to be something that's missing for your kids as well as for yourself. And I think that good fortune of having all of those things as an opportunity to be a strength of his.
Luke, anytime you're in a position of coaching at the so-called non-Power 5 level and you're as good as your program is, everyone in the offseason points to schedule first as it relates to how far can this team go. And when you see that Indiana game in week 3 and then an open date and then Notre Dame, and then what's left in the remaining schedule, which we all know the American Athletic Conference has been outstanding, it does appear to be a schedule that sets up beautifully if your team can make the kind of run that we're accustomed to seeing. How about this schedule? What do you make of it? And do you think that it helps you set yourself apart as a potential party crasher?
Don't forget, after that Notre Dame game is UCF too. So
yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
We all know these things are scheduled so far in advance, so it's kind of unique that you hope that you hit some of these things on a stride where maybe you've got a fourth-year quarterback and you feel good going to, especially early in the season. I've always kind of stressed, hey, you got to be playing your best ball at the end of the year. We're not going to go into this season as we start camp tonight and mention anything about a playoff, anything about, undefeated, anything about, Indiana or Dame. In the good fortunes of that year one, when we came in, all it was about, and we were pretty bad, was let's find a way. Our objective, our one goal is to play for championships, not even say winning. We want to put ourselves in a position to play for championships. If we do that, then everything else can take care of itself. If you don't put yourself in a position to play for a championship, nothing else has a chance to happen. Now, that kind of gives you the flexibility of not just honing in on any one or two games in particular, but kind of the mindset of the process and the whole journey. So just to bring up, those two games are a little bit more unique in the proximity. And if you look at the makeup of our team being 80% from a 300-mile radius, Indiana and Notre Dame both pull a little bit on a lot of the kids from where they've grown up and what they know. So a good it's something that you got to really work with to make sure we stay focused and not overemphasize either one of those two games, as opposed to put ourselves in a position to play for a championship.
Yeah, and in this sport, as you know, it's so fascinating to me because we can sit here and talk all you want, and all of it is important, culture and coaching staff, and you got to have it all. There's certainly, but you also, it is a non-starter if you don't have a quarterback that can play at a championship level, and you have that. You've got that returning guy, and college football is so unique, Coach, because it's such a vast difference, and the turnover is so frequent for all of you coaches in terms of having a returning starter or not having a returning starter. What's the ceiling for Ritter? What do you expect from him as both a player and a leader this year?
Well, I really do think the ceiling it's really high, and sometimes as being your own, you know a lot of the other things, and so you sometimes, even like your own kids, you think that maybe they're better than they really are, but I truly believe that he's in a great position, meaning he's a competitor. He's gone through struggles, whether it was in the first year where he had to do everything with his legs, to the second year where there was a lot more pressure on him, to the third year where he had a whole new wide receiver group and he had to kind of get a mix of it. The great thing about him is he's been through struggles. He's continued to find ways to be successful. And I think he's now being challenged, which is the greatest thing that he has going for him. He's much better when he's challenged. He's being challenged to go from that middle range, who knows, third, fourth round pick that maybe they could have projected him as last year, to saying you have an opportunity to raise your play and get yourself into the talk for those, top 3-4 quarterbacks in the country, which when some people you'd say, I don't know if I want to put that pressure on him. I don't know if I want to, this is a kid that does nothing but motivate him and make him better at what he does. So with that being said, I feel really good about what he has done and even better about what he really can do.
Okay, Luke, I want to shift gears just a little bit. Obviously, everybody knows you're a terrific football player from your days at Ohio State. But before that, I found this story I found this story from Cleveland.com a few years back, where it said that you were unbeaten as a 3-time state champ in wrestling. And this is a quote. Fickell was untouchable as a senior. At 6'4", 235, he pinned most of his 39 opponents. A handful of wrestlers were so afraid of him, they forfeited matches. So a few years ago, I did this story where I surveyed 30 coaches and said, if there was kind of a battle royal, who do you think would be the last head coach standing? You got a bunch of votes, as well as Seth Luttrell, Mario Cristobal, Ed Ogeron. Who do you think would be your toughest competition if this mythical battle royal were to go down?
Are you adding the NFL in there too? Because my college roommate, I would say, would be the only one that would have just even a chance, and that's Vrabel. So I'm not a bettor. I don't bet. I won't gamble. But if I ever was or were to gamble, I would bet on myself.
Yes, I love
it.
Sit here and pound a chest. If we're having races, I'm good. I'm not betting. If we're having liftoffs, I'm good. They can all have it. I'm good. If we're going into an octagon, if we're going into where there's some type of mat involved, there's only one person betting on. So
I love it.
I don't know what that means for you and all, but I haven't done it.
Did Vrabel ever get the best of you?
No. He tried though. He wasn't one of those guys that backed out. No, there was many a times that somebody at least had to stop it because neither one was going to stop. So
I want to know how many coffee tables, if you even had them, were broken in college in the wrestling matches that went on.
I would say we probably didn't have a whole bunch of coffee tables, but I know there was a ping pong table that was completely destroyed. But
I'm sure.
Why? But I'm sure.
Bruce. I want one thing in life in my broadcasting career. I'd love to be able to say, all right, in our final match, one fall in the remainder of television time, Luke Fickell. All right, that's
just in case you guys were wondering. I was up last night till midnight watching the wrestling, and then I was up at 5:15 this morning watching the wrestling. Some of it was the female wrestling, which I had never seen, but I tried to watch every single match. So
that's
I might
so good.
Not anymore, but I still try to pay attention.
That's great.
Just in case I'm challenged. Just in case.
We have so many other questions to ask you, but I feel like ending on wrestling feels like the proper place to kind of close this book. Have a safe bus ride out across state lines into Indiana for your camp, and we can't wait to see you guys as you try to defend your AAC championship. And thanks again for joining us. We appreciate it, Coach.
Thanks for having me, guys. I could do nothing better than to end it with some type of wrestling. So now I can appreciate it.
All right, I'm going to go put Brando in a sleeper hold, and we're going to go talk about notable impact transfers. Boy, they have become a growing factor in the world of college football and the fate of your favorite college football programs. We asked our Fox College Football World which transfer will have the best season for their new team. We're going to hear some of your responses in a moment. We asked the Big Noon crew who they thought their top 5 most impactful transfers would be. So let's start at number 5, Charlie Brewer, one of 4 offensive players on this list going from Baylor to Utah. There will be another quarterback in a moment. At number 4, the tight end. Boy, how highly recruited was Gilbert, originally at LSU and then staying inside the SEC to go to Georgia. That one is going to be a fascinating one. Running back, number 3, Eric Gray, another SEC type transfer, leaving though Tennessee and heading to Norman, Oklahoma to run there. At number 2, we go back to the quarterback, a Florida to Florida transfer, former UCF great Mackenzie Milton, after that horrific injury, heads up to Tallahassee. And boy, Florida State has had a lot of quarterback issues in the past. Milton listed as number 2, but the number 1 impactful transfer, it's going to be on the defensive side. Henry Toto heading from Tennessee to Alabama. It's so strange, to see all of these transfers, guys, but number 1, the fact that it's guys leaving from one team in the SEC to another program in the SEC. Yeah. This is kind of bizarro world that we're in right now.
It is. And think about it, Rob. You have Tennessee, which has really been like kind of a dumpster fire at the end of last year. And what you take is the best player in the program on the defensive side of the ball. Let's start with Henry To'oto'o. He goes to Alabama, where he will join Will Anderson, Christian Harris. This is going to be a phenomenal group of linebackers that Nick Saban has, right? Good luck for the rest of the SEC now. But talking to coaches at Tennessee who are around Henry, they just said, you're talking about a guy really physical, high football IQ. They felt like he was a big time leader at a place that desperately needed leadership. Goes sideline to sideline, loves to be physical. I think he's everything that what Nick Saban wants in a linebacker. Honestly, this was a guy that everybody wanted. He ended up at Tennessee. And I think you're talking about going from, the outhouse to the penthouse. That's basically what he's doing here by going to Alabama. As far as Eric Gray, in terms of good luck to everybody who's now dealing with Lincoln Riley's running back room. Now he got Kennedy Brooks back. He opted out last year. Really good running back. And now you get Eric Gray. The old Tennessee coaches really liked him. They thought he had elite short area quickness, really good hands, and just pick things up really quickly. I think he's going to be an excellent compliment to Kennedy Brooks in terms of what he brings that offense. I mean, the Oklahoma coaches I spoke to this spring thought he really hit the ground running and really picked it up. Now, he's one of actually 3 transfers that Oklahoma took from the Vols. This one, I think, will be the biggest impact guy right away, just because of his maturity and how he kind of really is able to grasp concepts and just his experience. And I think this is a great addition for Lincoln Riley.
Programs just picking at the Tennessee scraps and pulling the best pieces for them. Sooner Nation is pretty fired up that Mr. Gray is going to be running in Norman this year. So you already got the quarterback spot filled there. And now a running back question mark drops in. Eric Gray and Sooner Nation. Yeah, probably. That dude is extremely talented. All right, well, thanks for the insight. I think that's what Bruce told you. Let's talk about quarterbacks, because Joel Klatt, you like to remind me every week, that is the most important position in all of college football. And the struggles at quarterback for a program that has been traditionally rich at that spot, Florida State, it's really been amazing. And now they have to lean on a transfer, Mackenzie Milton, who has great success, but also massive question marks.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't played in a couple of years, right? And the injury was horrific the last time we saw him. For me, if you look back in the last 5 or 6 years, the most impactful transfers in college football in general, they're all quarterbacks. Why? Because they can change your program immediately. And this is a type of guy that can do that, not only because of his stellar play. I mean, he's undefeated as a starter. He's an excellent player, 2-time AAC Player of the Year. But to me, Rob, it's even more than that. This is a program in Florida State that desperately needs leadership, right? They have just not had it, in particular from the quarterback position, and they need it badly. And so a veteran like this, a mature player like this, I think he can do wonders, not only for the play on the field, but for the chemistry of the locker room. And that's why I think Mackenzie Milton will be one of, if not the most impactful transfers this year in college football.
All right, let's stay with another quarterback right now. If you played quarterback at Baylor, this is pretty much what you did. You're just throwing it. You're throwing it before the snap is even there, right? That's what Baylor football has done, and that's what Charlie Brewer did. Utah, though, Bruce, doesn't quite have that reputation of being that pass happy. So why is Charlie Brewer a pretty good fit in Salt Lake City?
Well, I'm talking to Kyle Whittingham the other day. One of the first things that jumped out of his mouth when it was like, what do you like about him, was toughness. Nobody has kind of prided themselves on being a tough guy, and that's part of the DNA of his program, than Kyle Whittingham in Utah. So that is something for a transfer to come in and really make a profound impact inside the locker room and impress your coaches that way. I think that's a big selling point. He has played a ton of football. He's obviously thrown a lot of passes in the Big 12. And I think what you're talking about here, I don't think they're going to, all of a sudden he's going to go and turn it into like he's going to Texas Tech and play for Mike Leach. That's not what Kyle Whittingham's going to want from his offense. But I think when you see how good this team is going to be on both sides of the ball in the trenches, and this is one of those years where it feels like Utah is loaded on the defensive line, on defense, I think what they need is the intangibles and the really smart decision-making. Brewer has played so much football that I think he really fits for them to come in and just kind of flip the switch a little bit and make them play cleaner, make them play sharper, and be that field general that I think Kyle Whittingham has been looking for.
social media, what say you about Charlie Brewer leaving Waco and heading to Salt Lake City? Show us the graphic so we can react to the tweet. Brewer's going to ball out at Utah. All right. Klatt, you agree with that real quick?
I do. And Bruce touched on it. Utah is one of those rosters that Bruce, what do you think? 8 years, maybe since he finally got to the Pac-12 and got it going. They've been an efficient quarterback away from being a playoff team a couple of times. Like I think that goes under the radar a little bit, guys, and the kind of the overarching college football conversation is just how good Utah has been. Bruce is exactly right. This roster is really good. They were young last year, but very talented. Their offensive and defensive line might be one of, if not the best combination in the entire Pac-12. And if they get that tough, efficient leadership style of Charlie Brewer at the quarterback position, Utah could very easily win the Pac-12 conference. I think that they've got a roster. That's why he was my number 2 impact transfer. But Rob, a guy I want to focus on, and it's because he's going to a program that is in the middle of one of their best runs in their history, is Jack Cohn going to Notre Dame. Okay, guys, we have seen Notre Dame now win double-digit games in 3 straight seasons for the first time in their history. Okay, and that's a big history, right? That's a long and storied history, and they've got to continue that success. They are a playoff caliber team. They've recruited at such a high level. I'm such a fan of what Brian Kelly has done. And now Jack Cohn comes in, and you can make an argument that he just got beat out because he got injured, right? So this is not a guy that's having to find a new home because of poor play. He led the Big Ten in efficiency and completion percentages last year as a full starter. And I think if he brings that level of play to Notre Dame, then they have proven, not only with the development on the offensive line that they've had for the better part of the last decade, but just their overall strength as a program, that if they get quality quarterback play and that person doesn't turn the football over, that they're a team that can compete at the highest levels in college football and potentially make a playoff run. So that's why I think Jack Cohn could have a massive impact on the college football year.
And we will see Jack Cohn in Notre Dame live in person later in September. Loving this matchup. Wisconsin, Notre Dame, Soldier Field.
Faces his old team. How good is that? Oh, it's going to be so good.
Great drama. And that one, again, a Big Noon Kickoff matchup live on Fox. And it's a great segue for us to say goodbye, but also tease next week. We're going to talk about Notre Dame and the ACC. Is Clemson still the program to beat? A theme that you hit on earlier, right, Joel? These big major conferences always seem to have that one team, but is North Carolina primed to slide in there? Is Notre Dame?
Your Tar Heels. Watch out.
I'm going to hit my Tar Heels. We're also going to talk the top 5 impact freshmen in college football. All that coming your way next week on Big Noon Kickoff, the offseason. Enjoy the weekend.